Welcome to Echo Crime YouTube channel, The Respected Doctor. The story begins in the quiet suburbs of Indianapolis, Indiana, during the late 1970s, a time when the idea of fertility treatment was still experimental, and hope was often stronger than science. In a modest medical office tucked away on 86th Street, Dr. Donald Klein was known as a man of faith, family, and medicine. A trusted fertility specialist, helping countless couples who longed for children. His calm voice, reassuring manner, and promise of modern science drew families from across the state. For many, Dr. Klein was more than a doctor. He was their last chance at parenthood. Patients would come into his clinic desperate for a miracle. Klein promised that he would use sperm from anonymous medical students, healthy young men who donated under strict confidentiality. His procedure was simple, his results astounding. Couples who had tried and failed for years suddenly found themselves pregnant after visiting his office. Smiles, thank you cards, and baby photos filled his walls. To everyone in Indianapolis, Dr. Donald Klein was a hero of modern medicine, a pioneer in reproductive health. But what none of his patients knew was that behind those clinic doors, Klein was hiding a secret so disturbing that it would stay buried for more than 30 years. Unbeknownst to anyone, he wasn't always using donor sperm. He was using his own. Time after time, procedure after procedure, Klein quietly replaced the donor vials with his own samples. He kept no records, told no one, and trusted that no one would ever find out. There were no DNA tests back then, no digital databases, just his word and his patient's trust. For Klein, this was his God complex in action. He believed he was helping, that he was giving life in the way only he could. He told himself it didn't matter, that the women would never know, that the children would never suspect, and Thosha, at his name, would remain respected. But every child born through his secret actions carried a part of him. And decades later, the truth would begin to unravel in the most unexpected way. The first crack in the silence came years later, in the age of home DNA testing, when people began sending their saliva to companies like 23andMe and Ancestry DNA. They were looking for family roots, not the family secrets that hid beneath them. One of Klein's biological children, Jacoba Ballard, took one of those tests out of curiosity. What she found would ignite a scandal that shook the entire medical world to its core. As she scrolled through her DNA results, something seemed off. The platform matched her with several half-siblings, not one, not two, but 7 genetic matches, all living in the same part of Indiana. The odds of that happening by coincidence were nearly impossible. Confused, Jacoba reached out to some of the matches. Slowly, through cautious messages and shared stories, the pieces began to fall into place. They realized all of their mothers had visited the same fertility clinic, and all around the same time. What began as a curiosity on a website soon became a nightmare. How could so many people be connected genetically through one man? Who was their father really? That's when they saw his name again. Dr. Donald Klein, the man who had helped their parents conceive, the doctor they had trusted their families with. In that moment, a new truth began to take shape, and it was darker than anyone could have imagined. The DNA doesn't lie. By the early 2010s, the quiet suburban lives of dozens of people in Indiana began to overlap in eerie ways. It all started with Jacoba Ballard, the first to suspect that something was terribly wrong. After discovering multiple half-siblings through DNA tests, she began organizing meetups, connecting with others who had the same mysterious biological matches. At first, the group joked about how strange it was, Maybe our moms all went to the same doctor, one said. But as more DNA tests came in, the laughter faded. The number of half-siblings kept growing. 10, 15, 20. Every single one of them shared the same biological father, a man who had lived and worked just miles away from where they'd all grown up. Some of them had even attended the same schools, lived in the same neighborhoods, and gone to the same churches. They began calling one another siblings by science, but behind that phrase was a deep sense of betrayal. Their mothers had trusted one man to help them create life, and that man had turned their hope into his secret experiment. The group began digging deeper. They traced medical records, clinic histories, and newspaper clippings until one name surfaced again and again. Dr. Donald Klein. A man once respected, now retired, living quietly in Indianapolis. When the group approached local reporters, the story seemed unbelievable. A fertility doctor who had inseminated his patients with his own sperm, and no one ever knew. But the evidence was building. DNA doesn't lie, and the connections were scientifically undeniable. In 2015, a local TV news investigation finally brought the case into the light. Reporter Angela Ganote from Fox 59 interviewed Jacoba and other siblings, broadcasting their story to the nation. The headlines were shocking. Dozens of children linked to fertility, doctor through DNA testing. The FBI soon got involved. Investigators confronted Dr. Klein, who initially denied everything. He wrote letters to the state attorney general's office claiming he had never used his own sperm, that this was all a misunderstanding, an attack on his reputation. But when confronted with DNA evidence that linked him biologically to multiple offspring, the truth became impossible to deny. In one interview, Klein admitted that between 1979 and 1986, he had used his own sperm approximately 50 times. He said he had only done it when donor sperm was unavailable, claiming he was just trying to help families conceive. But those words rang hollow for the families whose lives he had deceived. For them, this wasn't help. It was a violation of their trust and their autonomy. Despite the magnitude of the scandal, investigators quickly hit a wall. There was no law in Indiana at the time that made what Klein had done explicitly illegal. He couldn't be charged with sexual assault because the patients had technically consented to artificial insemination, though not with his sperm. He couldn't be charged with medical malpractice either, as the statute of limitations had expired decades earlier. Ultimately, the only thing prosecutors could charge him with was obstruction of justice, for lying to investigators about the allegations. It was an unbelievable loophole, one that left the victims stunned. The man who had fathered dozens of children under false pretenses would face only the mildest of consequences. In 2017, Dr. Donald Klein pleaded guilty to 2 counts of obstruction of justice. He received a 1-year suspended sentence, meaning he spent no time in prison. His medical license was revoked, but by then, he had already retired. For the families, justice felt incomplete, a punishment that did not fit the enormity of his actions. For the children he had secretly fathered, the questions were only beginning. How many of them were out there? Would they ever know the full truth? And perhaps most haunting of all, how many others like Klein might have done the same thing, hidden behind the walls of medicine and trust? The fallout and the law that changed everything when news of Dr. Donald Klein's actions broke nationwide. Shockwaves rippled through America. Families who had once trusted their doctors began questioning everything. How could something so personal, so sacred, be violated and yet go virtually unpunished? Reporters camped outside Klein's Indianapolis home. The story dominated headlines, morning talk shows, and news specials. The public couldn't believe that a respected fertility doctor had secretly fathered dozens, possibly more than 90 children, and still walked free. For the victims, the revelation was more than just a legal injustice. It was an identity crisis. Children grew up realizing the men who raised them were not their biological fathers. Mothers felt betrayed by the doctor who promised to help them start families. Some of the siblings, now adults, wrestled with the horror of knowing they could have unknowingly dated or befriended someone biologically related to them, a chilling possibility in the small Indianapolis community. One of the most vocal voices among them was Jacoba Ballard, who refused to let the story fade. Alongside other siblings, she began speaking publicly, sharing her experience with lawmakers and the media. They weren't driven by revenge. They wanted change. They wanted laws that would protect future patients from ever enduring the same betrayal. Their courage and persistence caught the attention of Indiana state legislators, who were equally shocked to learn that no statute directly criminalized what Klein had done. In 2018, their advocacy led to something unprecedented. The state of Indiana passed the first ever fertility fraud law in the United States. The law made it a level 6 felony for any fertility doctor to use their own sperm, egg, or reproductive material without the patient's consent. It also gave victims the right to sue for damages, not just emotional, but biological and ethical harm. The law was a direct result of the Klein case. His actions had rewritten medical ethics and legislation. But even as justice slowly took form, the emotional scars ran deep. Many of Klein's biological children struggled with the weight of their shared DNA. Some met each other for the first time in emotional gatherings. Strangers bound by deception. Others chose silence, unable to face the man whose choices had defined their existence. In interviews, several expressed compassion for their mothers, but anger toward the system that allowed a man like Klein to operate unchecked for so long. The scandal even caught global attention when Netflix released its 2022 documentary, Our Father. The film exposed the story to millions, putting faces to the names, and showing the chilling extent of Klein's deception. The documentary reignited outrage and pushed for awareness of similar cases around the world, where fertility doctors were found to have secretly used their own sperm in procedures. As of today, more than 90 half-siblings are confirmed through DNA testing, all biologically linked to Dr. Donald Klein. He remains a free man, now in his 80s, living quietly in Indiana. He rarely speaks publicly and has shown little remorse for his actions. But his legacy is not silence, it's reform. Because of him, new fertility fraud laws have been passed not only in Indiana, but also in Texas, Colorado, California, and Florida. Each law stands as a reminder that medical trust, once broken, must be rebuilt through transparency and accountability. For the families, there may never be full justice, but their persistence ensured that Klein's secret, once hidden behind sterile clinic walls, would never be repeated in darkness again.